Welcome to Elselah Books Podcast.
We are diving deep into a life that, it really redefines words like radical and dedication.
It really does. Today's deep dive is based entirely on the sources you provided, and we're focusing on the staggering life and, frankly, the immense influence of Adoniram Judson.
And this is a story built on the most extraordinary extremes. When you track Judson's journey, you're watching a man go from being a brilliant skeptic, absolutely convinced he was above all that, to a figure who endured just an incredible spectrum of sacrifice.
It's almost unbelievable. French piracy, imprisonment, spending nearly 2 years in these horrific Burmese jails.
And on top of that, the devastating personal loss of 2 wives, multiple children. His dedication was, well, it was absolute.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before he became this legend, the man behind the Burmese Bible, he was just Adoniram Judson, a young man who was so certain of his intellectual framework. And the most arresting detail, the thing that really launched this entire lifelong devotion, was a terrifying night he spent next door to a dying man. So we have to start there, I think. We need to understand the intellectual life he rejected first.
It's the only way it makes sense. Judson was a true prodigy, born August 9, 1788, and his path just seemed set for academic greatness from the start.
He learned to read at age 3.
Before 3, yeah. And by 12, he was tackling major, complex books with ease. He wasn't just smart, he was intellectually independent.
And that horsepower, it put him in positions of authority so early. By 19, he's already a teacher.
Right, and the sources point out that he'd already published 2 instructional books, The Elements of English Grammar and The Young Lady's Arithmetic.
Printing books before you're 20, that just speaks volumes about his confidence, doesn't it? He graduates from Brown University in 1807, and it looks like he's destined for fame.
But that same critical, probing mind led him straight toward a really deep skepticism. He's operating in a period where Enlightenment philosophy was hugely influential in academic circles.
And he falls under the sway of authors like Thomas Paine.
Exactly. We often think of Paine in the context of the Revolution, but his book Common Sense had this powerful secularizing effect on a lot of young intellectuals like Judson.
So what was the core argument he took from it?
The argument that Judson really internalized was that all major religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you name it, were basically cynical inventions.
Not divine, but man-made tools.
Sophisticated tools, yeah.
Yep.
Created by clever men for profit and to cement their authority over the masses. Religion was a power grab, not truth.
And he had a friend, right, someone who reinforced this worldview.
Yes, his close friend Jacob Eames. He was really instrumental in guiding Judson toward outright atheism, convincing him that common sense was just irrefutable logic.
So this wasn't some slow drift away from his parents' faith.
Oh no, it was a clean break. The sources say that on his 20th birthday, 1807, Judson just told his devout parents point blank, "I do not believe the Bible."
Wow.
And then he left home, determined to forge his own path, free from what he saw as, intellectual shackles.
And that rejection, that certainty, it just sets the stage for the one moment that changes absolutely everything.
It completely undermines the rational foundation he'd built his entire worldview on.
Right. So Judson's traveling to New York to start this new life. He stops at an inn, and the owner gives him the only room left.
But this room is separated from the one next door by just a paper-thin curtain. And in that other room, a young man is dying.
The innkeeper even asks him if he's afraid to be sleeping so close to death.
And Judson, sticking to his new philosophy, says something like, "I have no fear, I am an atheist."
But the reality of death, the sound of it, it doesn't really care about his philosophy. He couldn't sleep.
He could hear everything, the groans of the dying man. And it wasn't peaceful. It was, by all accounts, the sound of terror and distress.
And despite his confidence in atheism, that sound, that anguish from the next room, starts to create a fear he just can't rationalize away.
What's so fascinating is how a single sound can just shatter an entire intellectual framework. The next morning, he's gripped by this mix of curiosity and dread. He has to ask the inn owner about the man.
And the owner confirms he died, a young man, a student. So Judson presses for the name.
And the name he hears is Jacob Eames.
The very friend who led him into atheism. The irony is just absolutely devastating.
It is, because Judson knew that Eames believed what common sense taught. That death is just a peaceful end, nothing more. But the terror Eames showed in his final hours completely contradicted that.
He'd seen devout Christians die peacefully, but his atheist friend died in despair.
And that's the moment. He realized the theoretical piece of skepticism was fragile, but the reality of death was terrifying.
So he just abandons his journey instantly, returns home, asks his father for forgiveness, and says he now believes in the Bible. A total reversal.
A complete one. And it leads directly, and I mean immediately, to this unwavering call to mission. He starts studying theology at William College in Andover.
And he finds a community there, right? He wasn't alone in this.
No, he was joined by a small group, Samuel Knott, Samuel Mills, Luther Rice, and they'd meet secretly to pray and talk about taking their message overseas.
To really dangerous places like India or Burma.
Places where they knew the challenges were immense. Brutal travel, new languages, no support system.
And Judson's conviction gets tested right away. He gets a very generous, very safe job offer from a respected Boston pastor, a friend of his father's.
Right, from Dr. Edwin Griffin.
Yeah.
But Judson just rejects it, famously saying, "How great is the distance I have to go?" He was only interested in the farthest edges of the world.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting because his impact starts before he even leaves the country.
That's right. He writes to the London Missionary Society for support, and when the American pastors in Andover hear about this, they have a realization.
That America needs its own organization.
Exactly. Why are we sending our best young men to get support from a foreign society? This urgency leads directly to the founding of the American Board for Foreign Missions, the ABCFM, on June 28, 1810.
So Judson's personal initiative was the spark that created America's first foreign mission board.
It really was. So with their backing, he sails for England, but the journey immediately becomes a preview of his entire life. The ship, the packet, is captured by French pirates.
His first taste of what's to come.
His first lesson in arbitrary suffering. He's imprisoned in France for 4 months before an American diplomat helps him escape.
He gets back to America, marries Anne Hazeltine, and just 14 days later, they're on a ship to Calcutta, India. The commitment is just staggering.
But the obstacles were immediate and overwhelming. The British East India Company was fiercely opposed to American missionaries. They saw them as political meddlers.
And ordered them to leave.
Immediately. They were forced onto a ship headed for the Isle of France, modern-day Mauritius, and that journey was just horrific.
5 months at sea, and during that time, their companion Newell's wife tragically died.
They were being chased across the Indian Ocean, blocked from their goal, but they refused to go back to America. They were determined to go wherever God commanded.
And they eventually made it from Madras to Rangoon, Burma, arriving on July 13th, 1812. This was it, their final destination.
And maybe one of the most hostile environments you could imagine for their mission.
The sources describe it so vividly. Burma was ruled by these incredibly cruel kings who maintained obedience through torture and capital punishment.
And culturally, the opposition was immense. Buddhism was the state religion, but crucially, the population was educated. They were literate. They had their own ancient texts.
This wasn't a blank slate. It was a sophisticated culture deeply invested in its own beliefs.
Which meant the first hurdle was just communication. So Judson focused intensely on learning the language. The sources say he studied day and night for 3 straight years.
An utterly exhaustive effort.
So exhaustive, his health failed, but he pressed on. Help finally arrived with Mr. and Mrs. Hugh, who brought a printing press, a huge technical advantage.
That let them print thousands of pamphlets and start the monumental task of translating the New Testament into Burmese.
But, despite all that effort, all that investment, for years, nothing.
After 4 years, still no converts. The psychological toll of that must have been just staggering.
And it was compounded by tragedy. Anne's health was failing. Their first son died at just 8 months old. The sacrifice was mounting, but the goal remained so far away.
It took 7 years and 4 months. 7 years before their first convert, a man named Mong Nao, was baptized.
And then 2 others followed. They finally had traction. But just as they found a foothold, the political world just exploded around them.
The British military arrived, triggering a war with the Burmese kingdom.
And immediately, all foreigners, including Judson, were seen as spies. He was arrested and thrown into prison for 21 months.
And the conditions in that prison, they were just horrific. The sources are chilling. Unsanitary, a single room with 100 other people.
And he was shackled with 14-pound iron chains on his hands and feet. They left scars that he carried for the rest of his life. It was just sheer, protracted brutality.
But this is where Anne Judson's heroism really comes to the forefront.
Absolutely. Despite being desperately ill herself, she was their lifeline. She risked her own safety every day to bring food for Judson and his companion, Dr. Price.
Her most strategic move, though, came when the prisoners were being marched to a new jail. She knew how valuable his manuscripts were.
His entire life's work.
So she hid them. inside a pillow she made for him and convinced the guards it was just for comfort. She literally saved his mission.
An incredible act of courage. Judson was eventually released, but only because the king needed a translator to negotiate with the British.
But the reprieve came at a devastating cost.
Anne's health, already so fragile, just collapsed. The constant stress, the exhaustion. It was too much. She died at age 37.
And just 6 months later, their young daughter died, at 2 years and 3 months old. The cost to his family was just beyond measure.
Yet he remained. After all that loss, he went right back to his primary task, the Burmese Bible. He finished it, a task that took 21 years of his life.
And the quality was so high that native Burmese scholars praised it, saying it would be sufficient for 300 years.
That kind of validation is incredible. Even after losing his second wife, Sarah Broadman, he kept going until his own health finally gave out completely.
His final voyage was actually an attempt to get Sarah back to America for treatment.
But he never made it back to land. He died at sea on April 12, 1850, and his body was committed to the ocean.
But his legacy, 38 years of service, he founded 63 churches, oversaw 7,000 baptisms, and he inspired over 160 other missionaries to serve in Burma alone.
And there's one final detail about his character that just says it all. The British king paid him 7,200 rupees for his translation work, a huge sum.
And he immediately donated it all back to the mission board.
Every bit of it. He just said, I am a mission worker, so this money belongs to the mission. He rejected significant personal wealth, even when he'd legitimately earned it.
Judson's story is just this profound narrative of radical transformation. From an intellectual skepticism that shattered against the reality of death to a conviction that let him endure decades of unthinkable brutality.
Which really raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. Judson rejected wealth. He chose to endure torture and isolation. He lost 2 wives and multiple children to disease in a foreign land. So how then do we really measure the success of a life? Is it by the riches and comfort we accumulate, or is it by the depth of conviction we maintain when we're facing absolute opposition and devastating personal cost?
Thank you for listening to our podcast.
Try to get this book. Read it and be blessed.